Right, so here's a thing I find genuinely funny. King of the Hill ran for 13 seasons on Fox, came back on Hulu 16 years later, and out of all of that, the single most quoted line in the entire show is a man being pedantic about his job title. Propane and propane accessories, not just propane, he'll correct you. That's Arlen for you. Nothing enormous ever happens. And yet the writers kept slipping in these proper bombshells about who these people actually are, usually in one line, usually while somebody's mowing a lawn. So that's what we're doing tonight. Every character, one at a time, what the show confirmed, what it buried, what it dropped once and never brought up again. No big finish, no twist ending, it just sort of keeps going for a while. If you fancy more of these, subscribing helps me out. Otherwise, get comfy. Let's start with the bloke on the box. I want to start with a piece of paper because it's the funniest document in the entire series. In the 5th season, there's an episode called Yankee Hanky, and somewhere in the middle of it, Hank ends up looking at his own birth certificate. Full legal name, Henry Rutherford Hill. Mother listed as Tilly. And then, underneath that, the bit that ruins his life, our place of birth, New York City, not Texas, New York. It gets worse or better depending on how much you enjoy watching this man suffer. He wasn't born in a hospital, he was born in a ladies' room at Yankee Stadium, and he spent the first 3 days of his life in New York before anyone got him home. 3 days, that's it, and it absolutely wrecks him. I love this. Of every possible birthplace the writers could have picked for the single most aggressively Texan character on television, they chose a toilet at Yankee Stadium. There's no way that wasn't somebody in the writer's room going, "What's the worst one?" And everybody immediately agreeing. And the thing is, it doesn't actually change anything. He grew up in Texas. He's Texan by every measure that matters to a normal person. But Hank isn't a normal person about this stuff, so a technicality on a form is enough to send him into a full existential wobble. That's basically the character in one image. Now, the other big Hank fact, and I'll explain it properly once here because it comes up later and I'm not going to keep repeating myself. Hank has a narrow urethra. It's established right in the pilot. It's not a throwaway either, it's load-bearing. It's the reason Bobby's an only child. Conceiving him was medically difficult, and there's a lovely little detail buried in there that I think about more than I should, which is that Lady Bird helped. The dog. Having the dog around lowered Hank's stress enough that it actually became possible. So the family we watch for 250 odd episodes exists, partly because a bloodhound turned up. That's canon. Nobody in the show treats it as remarkable. Right, here's a fun one on the design side. Hank isn't an original creation, not exactly. He's built off a character called Tom Anderson from Beavis and Butthead, the grumpy old neighbor who kept wandering into shot and getting his stuff wrecked. Same voice, same shape of face, same everything really. Mike Judge basically took a background irritant from one show and promoted him to lead of another. Which explains a lot about why Hank works, actually. He was already designed as a man, permanently one small annoyance away from a breakdown. Give that man a family and a job he loves, and you've got a series. Speaking of the job. Assistant manager at Strickland Propane, and he is genuinely, sincerely delighted about it, which is the joke nobody else in Arlen is in on. Everyone around him finds propane boring. Hank finds it close to a moral calling. Charcoal is not just inferior to him, charcoal is wrong. There's a moment I still think is one of the saddest funny things in the show. Hank gets promoted to manager, which is the thing he's wanted for years, and then in a single, unguarded moment, he tells Buck Strickland that he loves him. Just says it. And Buck demotes him for it almost immediately. That's the whole Hank problem in one scene. He physically cannot say that sentence to his wife or his son. And the one time it slips out, it goes to his boss and it costs him the job. The show never underlines it. It just happens and everybody moves on. The inability to say I love you is a real stated thing about him, by the way. Not just something fans noticed. He thinks it's unmanly. Bobby, who says whatever he's feeling the second he feels it, is therefore the most confusing thing that has ever happened to him. A few smaller ones while we're here. He's a Dallas Cowboys man, obviously, but he's worked out a loophole, and I find the loophole delightful. He's decided being a Houston Texans fan is technically permissible because they're in a different conference, so the two teams would only ever meet in a Super Bowl. He's essentially built himself a legal framework for a hypothetical divided loyalty that will almost certainly never occur. He looks forward to that Super Bowl the way other people look forward to an afterlife. He escapes to the lawn and the truck when home life gets difficult. That's stated outright in a couple of episodes. Whenever things are tense, Hank is outside doing something with a hose. And the shout, the bois, it's a running gag, and it does a huge amount of work because it's the only sound this man makes that isn't controlled. One last thing, and then I'll leave him alone for a bit. In the most recent stretch of the show, the season 15 finale, Hank ends up as the owner of Strickland Propane. Not assistant manager, owner. After all those years of loyalty to a man who repeatedly did not deserve it, he ends up with the company. I'm not going to unpack all of that yet because Buck gets his own bit later on, and I'd rather do it properly there. But it's a nice place to leave him. The man who was mortified by a birth certificate ended up running the shop. A couple more Hank things before I move on, because there are two habits of his that I think explain more about him than any of the big reveals. The first is the alley. Nearly every episode has the same shot in it. Hank, Dale, Bill, and Boomhauer standing in the alley behind the house, holding Alamo beer, talking about whatever happened that day. And when they've said everything they've got to say, or when they've simply run out, they don't say goodbye. They go, yep, or and then they all wander off. That's it. That's the ritual. 4 grown men who have known each other since school, conducting an entire friendship in a strip of concrete between 2 fences and signing off with a syllable. I've thought about that shot more than is probably healthy, because there's no version of it where anyone says anything difficult. Nobody in that alley has ever asked another man in that alley how he's actually doing. And yet they're there every single day for years in the same spot, and none of them would miss it. That's the show's whole thesis about men of a certain age, and it never once states it out loud. It just puts 4 blokes next to a fence and lets you notice. The second habit is what Hank does when things go wrong at home. He goes outside, he mows, he works on the truck. There are episodes that state this plainly, that whenever the house gets tense, Hank escapes into the lawn, which is a fairly sad coping mechanism dressed up as a hobby, and the show is completely aware of it. The lawn is the one thing in his life that responds predictably to effort. You put the work in, it looks right. Bobby doesn't work like that. Peggy definitely doesn't work like that. Grass does, and he takes it seriously. The correct height, the correct pattern. There's a version of this man in a different show who'd be insufferable about it. And the reason Hank isn't is that he never once tries to convert anybody. He just wants his own lawn correct and everybody else left alone. The thing people tend to underestimate about him, and I'd include myself here for years, is that he's actually tough. He's not a pushover. The people who try to take advantage of him because he's honest tend to regret it fairly quickly because he's shrewder and considerably harder than he looks. And he's got a long memory. Dauterive has learned this repeatedly. He's just decided very early that doing the right thing is not negotiable, which in a show full of schemers makes him look slow. He isn't slow. He's the only one with a fixed position, and everyone else keeps discovering that the hard way. Anyway, since we've got Hank's birth certificate out, let's talk about the man whose name is on the other half of it, because Cotton Hill is an entirely different kind of problem. The first thing you notice about Cotton Hill isn't a fact, it's a sound. He shouts everything. He shouts through walls, he shouts in hospital beds, he shouts at people standing about a foot away from him. And for 13 years, he refuses to call Peggy by her name. She is permanently Hank's wife. Not out of forgetfulness. He knows exactly what he's doing. That's the texture of the man. Now let's do the record, because the record is where it gets interesting. Cotton Lyndall Hill, World War II veteran, Pacific Theater. His shins were blown off, in his words, by a Japan man's machine gun, and army surgeons sewed his feet directly onto his knees. That's a story he tells constantly, and unlike a lot of what he says, that part is true and visible. Hank gives us the numbers on it at one point. Cotton was 6'4" with his shins. Without them, 5 foot flat. So he lost 16 inches of himself in the war and gained a walk that everyone in Arlen recognizes from a distance. Now here's the part that I think is properly clever writing, and it's the reason Cotton isn't just a loud granddad character. The show quietly audits him. He claims he served with the 77th Infantry Division. But his own war memorabilia has a 2nd Infantry Division badge sitting in it. He claims he fought Nazis, and that one gets flatly disproven on screen. He claims he killed Fitty men, which is treated as extremely dubious by everyone, including the narrative. And yet, his uniform carries the Medal of Honor, it carries the Purple Heart. His presence at some of the bloodiest fighting in the Pacific is confirmed, not implied. He rose to colonel in the Texas State Guard with his feet attached to his knees. So the show's actual position on Cotton Hill is that he is a compulsive liar and a genuine war hero at the same time, and it never once resolves that for you. It just leaves both facts sitting on the table. He inflated a story that didn't need inflating. He earned the medals and then couldn't stop embellishing around them. I think that's the most honest thing the series ever did with a veteran character personally. It'd be much easier to make him a fraud or a saint. He's neither. And nobody in Arlen ever gets a straight answer about which stories are which, right? The family, and this is where he stops being funny. Tilly, Hank's mother, divorced him after years of verbal abuse. There's a detail about her I can't get out of my head. She collects miniatures, tiny furniture, tiny houses, tiny everything. And the reason given is that they made her happy while she was married to him. That's it. That's the whole explanation, delivered as a small character quirk, and it recolors every shelf in her house. After Tilly, he marries Dee Dee, much younger, blonde, a candy striper at the hospital. And there's a detail there that makes Hank visibly unwell. Dee Dee went to elementary school with him. They're the same age. She was 39 when she turned up. Their son gets named GH, which stands for Good Hank. Good Hank, he named his second son Good Hank in front of his first son, whose name is Hank. There is no subtext left to find. Cotton treats the boy far better than he ever treated Hank, and the read the show offers is that he saw him as a second attempt. And then there's Junichiro. Cotton had a son in Japan during the war with a nurse called Michiko. Hank's older half-brother, voiced by David Carradine, working as an assistant manager at a company that makes robots and robot accessories. Which is, if you notice, exactly Hank's job title in a different industry. He also inherited the narrow urethra. And when he's startled, he shouts, "Bwah," same as Hank. The show gets a huge amount of mileage out of two men who were raised on opposite sides of the planet, turning out identical. Oh, and Cotton's nephew is Dusty Hill from ZZ Top, playing himself. That's canon. Hank Hill's cousin is in ZZ Top. Cotton dies in season 12 in an episode called Death Picks Cotton, and the manner of it is properly absurd. He has a war flashback at a Japanese teppanyaki restaurant, ends up with severe burns and a shrimp allergy reaction, and that's what finishes him. Not the war, prawns. His hospital room number is 237, which is a straight lift from The Shining. Nobody comments on it. It's just there for whoever spots it. And his last words about his son are that Hank is a worthless nothing of a loser son. Peggy is the only one in the room. When Hank comes back in, she tells him Cotton said he loved him. She lies, deliberately, kindly, and without ever mentioning it again. Then, because this is still a comedy, Hank builds a memorial shed with a plaque on it reading, "Cotton Hill American, everyone stands back to admire it," and Dale blows it up as a tribute. Here's a fun detail to finish on. Cotton isn't quite done after he dies. Years later, Dee Dee turns up with a box of his old possessions and a list of tasks, the last of which involves flushing his ashes down a toilet that General Patton once used. Hank does it, which contradicts an earlier episode where Peggy fought to get him buried in the Texas State Cemetery. And honestly, I've made my peace with that. He'd have wanted both. There's even a payoff decades on where the shin cream cotton spent a lifetime buying turns into settlement money for his sons. Before we leave him, the War Buddies, because they're a strange little institution in this show, Cotton has a circle of surviving mates from the Pacific, and the naming convention is glorious. There's Topsy, there's Stinky, and here's the thing, Stinky is not one person. Several of them are called Stinky. There's a Fatty, who does not survive the war and whose fate I am not going to describe in detail on a sleep video. There's a Brooklyn, and then there's Erwin Linker, who is one of the very few with an actual name and who turns up with an oxygen tank. Topsy is the recurring one, an old accomplice in whatever nonsense Cotton is running that week. According to Cotton, he was legally blind and had every tooth pulled out because they'd gone bad, and he could inflate his cheeks like a jazz trumpeter. He dies partway through the series and gets mentioned in passing, and he leaves his estate to Cotton, which I suspect was not a good decision. And they all end up in the same place. Above that toilet, the Patton one, there's a list of names, all of Cotton's war friends. Their ashes went the same way his did. So the running gag about the toilet is actually a memorial, and the show never flags it as one. It just puts the names on the wall and lets you do the arithmetic. Now, the thing about Cotton that I think gets missed, and I want to say it fairly, the show is clear that he has post-traumatic stress. It shows up more than once, properly, not as a punchline. There's an episode where he's confronted with becoming a father again and starts seeing infants as enemy soldiers. There's the restaurant, obviously, where a chef flipping food at a grill triggers something that ultimately kills him. None of that excuses him, mind. There's no late redemption arc, no softening, no episode where he turns out to have been lovely underneath. He is horrible to his wife, horrible to his son, horrible to his daughter-in-law for over a decade, and then he dies insulting Hank with his last breath. But it does mean the cruelty has a shape rather than being random. Something happened to him on an island in the Pacific, and he came back 16 inches shorter and permanently furious. And he then made that everybody else's problem for 60 years. Hank's own verdict, delivered flatly to his cousin Dusty in one episode, is that Cotton was a jackass. Not a complicated speech, just the two words from the person best qualified to say them, right? That's enough shouting. Let's go and talk about somebody with much bigger feet. Size 16 on the right foot, 16 and a half on the left. That's Peggy, and it's the detail the show returns to more than almost anything else about her. There's a running joke sitting underneath it too, which is that American shoe sizing doesn't actually have half sizes above a 12. So her left foot exists in a measurement that isn't real. The show knows. It's done on purpose. An entire episode gets built on those feet. She's at a bowling alley, has to ask for rental shoes, can't face it, and leaves. Later, she goes to a specialty shop for women with large feet and finds out she's gone up half a size and immediately starts catastrophizing about ending up at a 20. Then a man turns up telling her that her feet are the secret to her posture and her professional success, which she absolutely inhales, and which turns out to be a bloke filming them for a fetish website. That episode is called Peggy's Magic Sex Feet. Fox aired that in the year 2000. Anyway, the biography, briefly because it's genuinely relevant to who she is. Margaret J. Platter, born in Montana, raised on the family cattle ranch, which means the most vocally proud Texan woman in Arlen is, like her husband, technically an import. Neither of them ever puts those two facts next to each other. I've always found that funny. She's a substitute teacher specializing in Spanish, and she cannot speak Spanish. Not a bit. Not a little rusty, not out of practice. She is confidently loudly wrong in Spanish for the entire run, and this is never corrected, never improved, and never really punished. She was Substitute Teacher of the Year in Arlen in 1996. She mentions it. Now the one where she's actually brilliant, and this is my favorite Peggy fact by a mile. She's the Texas State Boggle Champion. Not a joke title, an actual tournament win. And the word she wins on is acquaintanceship, 16 letters. She pulled a 16-letter word out of a grid of dice and took the state. And that's the thing about Peggy that people get wrong when they write her off as a blowhard. She isn't stupid. Her vocabulary is genuinely enormous because she spent decades playing word games nobody else in the house wants to play. She once talks Hank through a filibuster to kill a law she doesn't like. She engineers a sabotage that forces the Alamo Beer Company to admit it knowingly sold dodgy beer. She personally outsmarts a con man who'd fleeced a chunk of Arlen with fake degree programs. And then in the same series, she gets taken for $2,500 by a fake degree, gets absorbed into a cult, and ends up flogging products in a pyramid scheme. Both of those Peggys are the real one. She's got real ability and absolutely no calibration, so she's either solving something nobody else could solve or handing her savings to a man with a laminated certificate. There's no in-between setting. The heaviest thing that happens to her, and the show treats it fairly seriously for a comedy, is the fall. At the end of the 3rd season, she goes skydiving. Her parachute doesn't open. The season ends with everyone assuming she's dead. She isn't, but she's badly broken, and a doctor tells her she will probably never walk again. She walks again, and the person who gets her there, of all the people available, is Cotton, the man who won't say her name. He turns up and drives her through it in his own horrible way, and it works. The show doesn't soften him afterwards. He goes right back to calling her Hank's wife. But for that one stretch, he's the only one who can do it. Right, lighter things. She names food after herself. Spa Peggy and meatballs. Apple Brown Peggy, Peggy's Frito pie. The method is that she takes an existing dish, changes roughly one ingredient, and then installs her own name in the title. Nobody stops her. Design-wise, she comes from the same place Hank does. She's built off Marcy Anderson from Beavis and Butthead, the neighbor's wife. So the two leads of King of the Hill are essentially a married couple who used to be background characters getting their stuff destroyed by teenagers. And here's a proper continuity oddity that I don't think the show ever meant to leave lying around. Peggy's mother changes. In early flashbacks, her mom is a soft, mild housewife, essentially an older version of Peggy herself. Later on, the show gives us Maddie Platter, a hard-as-nails Montana rancher who openly loathes her daughter for abandoning the ranch and not marrying some local boy. Totally different woman, totally different energy. The series never explains it. There's no stepmother line, no retcon acknowledgement, nothing. And Peggy eventually gives up on the relationship entirely and simply stops mentioning her. Which means the last word on the strangest continuity gap in the show is silence. Her father, Doc Platter, only really turns up properly once, talking almost exclusively in rural cowboy metaphors that Hank receives as ancient wisdom. He dies somewhere in the gap between the original run and the revival, mentioned in passing. I do like that about this show. People just die between seasons and get a line about it. Same as real life. A few more Peggy things because the woman has had an absurd number of careers and I don't think anyone tracks them. She's a substitute teacher. She's a freelance newspaper columnist for the Arlen Bystander, and a fairly mediocre one. And her main rival there is a veteran reporter called Bob Jenkins, who wears an eye patch because a brain tumor took his eye. She's a notary public, which she treats with the gravity of a judicial appointment. She's an outstanding softball pitcher. She skates roller derby for a while, on a team owned by a sleazy car dealer until she organizes the other skaters into a buyout and walks away from it. And later on, she moves into a state agency. That's not a career, that's a decade of a person refusing to be told what she is. The columns are where the ego lives, though. She writes musings, that's what she calls them. And a fair number of her musings are simply facts stated confidently, like the day after Thanksgiving being the busiest shopping day of the year, presented as though she has personally arrived at something profound. I find that genuinely funny rather than sad because the confidence never wavers. She hands in an observation everyone already knows and waits for the room to catch up. The gap between how she sees herself and how everyone else sees her is the engine of about 40 episodes. And the show is fond enough of her that it keeps letting her win. Not always, not even usually. But enough. There's an exchange I keep coming back to, actually. When she gets scammed by an online test that certifies her a genius, the thing that finally convinces her it's fake isn't logic or Hank or the price. It's finding out that Luanne got the same result. That's the tell. Her belief in her own intelligence survives an obvious con. It does not survive Luanne being included in it. And on Hank, briefly, because the marriage is one of the better ones on television, and it's worth saying why. He knows exactly who she is. He knows she can't speak Spanish. He knows the musings are nonsense. He's washed her hand money to a man selling degrees. And there is no version of any episode where he stops backing her. That's not the same as agreeing with her. He'll tell her she's wrong. He's told her plenty of times, but he's never once tried to make her smaller, and given that this is a man who cannot say, "I love you" to save his life, the way it comes out instead is that he simply never leaves the room. Right? Since we're in the house already, let's talk about the boy. That boy ain't right. It's the most repeated line in the show after the propane one, and Hank means it every single time. And the joke, the long one, the one that takes the whole show to land, is that he's wrong. Bobby's fine. Bobby's arguably the most well-adjusted person on the entire street. Robert Jeffrey Hill. Starts the series at 11, ages up to 13, and then just stops, the way cartoon children do. Voiced by Pamela Adlon, who has now been playing him for the better part of 30 years, including in the new episodes, which I think is quietly one of the more impressive runs in television. She was doing that voice before some of the people watching it now were born. Here's what I mean about Hank being wronged. Bobby wants to be a prop comic, genuinely, sincerely, that's the ambition. Move to New York, do comedy with objects. Hank hears that the way most fathers would hear their son announce a career in professional balloon animals. He takes home ec, he takes peer counseling, he avoids anything with a team in it, and Hank reads all of that as failure because Hank's entire framework for a son runs through football. But look at what he's actually good at. He's superb at golf. Not decent, superb. He's an excellent shot with a rifle, good enough that it genuinely startles people. He can cook and he has a palate, which comes up years before it becomes his job. He's funny, he's socially fearless, and he is by a wide margin the most romantically successful member of his own family, which is a thing the show never once comments on, and I find that omission hilarious. So the disappointment was never about ability. It was about format. Hank wanted the skills delivered in a shape he recognized, and Bobby kept delivering them sideways. And Hank never quite stops watching him with a slight squint, even when he's proud, which is one of the more honest father and son dynamics anyone's put on television. There's an episode where Bobby learns to kick people in the groin as a self-defense move and then goes completely mad with the power, kicking his way through Arlen, including eventually his own father. Peggy's the one who ends it purely by not having anything there to kick. That's the show's parenting philosophy in a nutshell. Somebody just absorbs the hit and the lesson lands. Right where he ends up because the revival does something I didn't expect with him. Bobby's 21 now, living in Dallas. He's part owner and chef at a place called Robata Chain, which is traditional Japanese barbecue crossed with the German cooking traditions of the Texas Hill Country. Read that back? A kid who took home ec against his father's wishes and spent the entire series being described as not right has ended up running a fusion restaurant. And it's not a gag, that's the point. He's good at it. He's got a sous chef. He's got a silent investor. He's stressed about margins. The show lets him be a competent adult, which is a genuinely brave choice given they could have just aged him up and kept him a clown. The season 15 finale fills in how he got there, and it's my favorite bit of the revival so far. When the Saudi Arabia job came up, Hank actually turned it down at first because he wasn't willing to uproot everyone. Meanwhile, teenage Bobby was going through a phase. Blue hair, deeply publicly obsessed with BTS. There's a moment where he mentions Jungkook, and Hank hears Joan Cook from PBS, which is exactly the level of pop culture reception you'd expect from that man. And Bobby's the one who solves it. He says he'll stay in Arlen, work at Whataburger, and live with Luanne and Lucky, which frees his parents to go and build a retirement fund abroad. So the entire premise of the new series exists because a rebellious teenager with blue hair volunteered to stay behind and get a job. That's a properly nice piece of retroactive character work. He also later writes #Army on his jacket, which I have no notes on. None. Perfect. One small callback and then I'll move on. Bobby being an only child isn't a writing convenience, it's medical, and we did that bit in the first section. But it's worth a second's thought because it means every scene of Hank not knowing what to do with this specific strange boy is a scene where there was never going to be a second attempt. No sporty younger brother waiting in the wings, just Bobby. And by the end, Hank's running a propane company and his son's running a restaurant. And the two of them still don't entirely understand each other, and they're fine. A few more Bobby bits, since he's got more range than people give him credit for. He tries stand-up at one point and it goes catastrophically. He gets advice from a comedian called Roger Sack who tells him to get in touch with his roots, and Bobby, being 12 and having no idea what that means, goes looking for material about his own background and ends up pulling jokes off a white supremacist website. He then performs them to a room in front of his father. And the thing that saves him is Roger, who is the person the material is aimed at, standing up for the kid's right to say the wrong thing badly and winning the room back. It's a properly odd episode, and it does not go where you expect at any point. There's another one where he gets seduced into building a meth lab. That's real. Khan's cousin Tid Pao, voiced by Lucy Liu, gets sent to Arlen after stealing drugs from a gang, ends up at Bobby's school, and convinces him she's helping with a science project involving a sweet machine. She gets him to steal propane tanks from Strickland to complete it. Connie's the one who works out what's going on and shuts it down, and Tid Pao gets shipped off to a dairy farm in Wisconsin. Bobby's contribution to the family crime record is unwittingly supplying a meth operation with his dad's propane. Nobody ever brings it up again. The friendship group deserves a mention too because it barely changes across the entire run. Bobby, Joseph, and Connie. That's the unit. And the shape of it shifts as they get older in ways that feel real rather than plotted. Joseph goes from a fairly normal kid to something considerably stranger. Connie pulls ahead academically, and Bobby just carries on being Bobby. One structural detail I love, and I don't think it's an accident. Joseph is the only character in the original run who physically grows up. He shoots up 6 inches over a summer, his voice drops, he gets a build on him, and a little wispy mustache, and he comes back looking like a different person. Everyone else stays exactly the same for 13 years. They did that to one kid. In a cast where nobody ages, they let one boy hit puberty on screen, and the effect is genuinely disorientating. Bobby, meanwhile, remains 13 right up until the revival, when he arrives fully formed at 21, with a business and a lease and an opinion about charcoal, which is the other thing worth flagging. His restaurant does robata grilling, which means his entire livelihood runs on live fire and hardwood charcoal. He has built a career on the one fuel his father considers morally indefensible. Nobody in the show says it out loud, it's just there, quietly, in the premise. Anyway, enough of the hills for a bit. Let's go next door, where a man is currently claiming his name is Rusty Shackleford. Rusty Shackleford. If you've watched any of the show, you know the name. It's the alias, the one he gives to anyone official, anyone with a clipboard, anyone who might conceivably be government. and most people assume he made it up. He didn't. Rusty Shackleford was a real boy he went to school with. An actual child whose actual name Dale has been using for decades, including to claim unemployment money. He's been running low-grade identity fraud against a former classmate as a lifestyle. That's Dale Alvin Gribble. And it's a good way in because everything about him works like that. The paranoia looks like a bit until you check the details, and then it turns out he's been doing something genuinely mad the entire time, and nobody's stopped him. The design, by the way, is lifted from Hunter S. Thompson. The sunglasses, the cap, the cigarette welded to the face, the general silhouette of a man who has been awake for 4 days. Once you know it, you can't unsee it. Let's do the inventory. He's an exterminator. He's the president of the Arlen Gun Club. He's a licensed bounty hunter. He owns an enormous collection of firearms, from pistols up to automatic weapons, and he's the most committed Second Amendment man in the postcode. He also cannot shoot straight. His aim is poor. And he is, on paper and in practice, the weakest and most physically cowardly person in the main cast. Bill's out of shape and Hank's middle-aged, but Dale is the one who will genuinely run away. I love that combination. The show gave the arsenal to the man least equipped to use it, and then let him be right about approximately one thing every 4 seasons, purely by accident. Now the family. Dale was estranged from his father, Bug Gribble, for 20 years, 2 decades of not speaking. And the reason, as Dale understood it, was that Bug kissed Nancy at Dale and Nancy's wedding reception, which he did. That happened. The actual explanation arrives much later in an episode called My Own Private Rodeo, and it's one of the better reveals in the series. Bug is gay. At the reception, he was flirting with one of the caterers, and he sensed Dale about to walk in, panicked, and grabbed the nearest thing in a dress to cover for himself. The nearest thing in a dress was his son's new wife. So the 20-year silence was a closeted man's split-second decision that went catastrophically wrong, and then his complete inability to explain it afterwards. And Dale, being Dale, spends the reunion convinced his father is an undercover federal agent. Bug has a partner. Bug's behavior is strange. Bug won't explain himself. Clearly a fed, he only accepts the truth when he sees the two of them kiss. Small continuity note for the nerds, Bug turns up in earlier episodes looking essentially identical to present-day Dale, and then gets completely redesigned for that reveal. The show just quietly swapped him out and hoped nobody minded. I don't mind. Right, the voice. And this one deserves a proper moment. Johnny Hardwick played Dale from 1997 until his death in 2023, 26 years. And he had already recorded material for the revival before he died, so some of what you hear in the new episodes is genuinely him. From episode 7 of the new season onward, the role passes to Toby Huss, which is a slightly beautiful bit of casting, because Huss had already been in Arlen from the start. He was Cotton, he was Con, he was half a dozen people around the edges. The show handed Dale to somebody who'd been living in that town for 13 years already. And then there's what Dale's been up to lately, which is my favorite thing in the entire revival. Dale was elected mayor of Arlen, actual mayor. He won on about 9% of the vote, because the field was so crowded that 9% was enough to top it, which is a real thing that happens in real elections, and I appreciate the show noticing. And then 36 hours later, he stood down. Not because of a scandal, because he decided he had no faith whatsoever in any system that would elect Dale Gribble. He described himself, and I think this is the finest phrase the show has ever produced, as an election denier. He denied his own election. He held office for a day and a half and resigned on principle, and the principle was that the result was obviously suspicious because it involved him winning. Honestly, it's the most consistent thing he's ever done. Now, there is one enormous Dale subject I have not touched, and that's deliberate, because it isn't really his story. It belongs to 3 people, and it deserves its own stretch. 2 more Dale things first, because they're both very him. He hires people. There's a bloke called Octavio, a sort of freelance mercenary, who does whatever bizarre tasks Dale requires provided the money's right. Breaking into the Hill's house in the middle of the night to look for Dale's kidney, for instance, which is a sentence I have now said out loud. He's got a large Rob Zombie tattoo on his chest that he once attempted to pass off as Jesus in order to join Luanne's Bible study purely because she was running it from a swimming pool. That's the caliber of associate Dale maintains. He has a Rolodex. And there's the kidney thing itself, which I'll do briefly because it's magnificent. Dale donates a kidney to a drag racer. Hank gets power of attorney for 3 days while he's under. And during those 3 days, Hank is dragged into helping Octavio smash up a car with rebar for an insurance claim, a scheme Dale had set up in advance. The man planned an insurance fraud around his own organ donation timetable. The other thing is the friendship, which is the part I think people get wrong about Dale. He is genuinely, relentlessly horrible to Bill. Constant. He finds Bill's misery entertaining in a way that occasionally makes me wince, and Hank tolerates him in a way that looks, from outside, like weakness. But Dale never leaves. Whatever's happening, whatever collapse anybody's having, Dale is in that alley. He blew up a shed as a memorial. He rebranded his wife's lover into a functioning children's entertainer. He turned up. He is, in his own catastrophic way, one of the most loyal people in the show, and he expresses it entirely through explosives and paperwork fraud. There's also the small matter of his oath of celibacy, which he takes at one point and appears to keep, and the fact that he mostly sleeps in the basement. Nancy is having a 14-year affair upstairs, and Dale is downstairs, faithful, monitoring the phones. Which, and I say this with sympathy, is why the phone monitoring is so funny. He records incoming calls. He is watching the house at a level of surveillance that a small government would consider excessive. And the one thing he has never detected is the thing happening in his own bedroom. There's a whole cottage industry of fan theories arguing he must know. That the denial is a choice. That he's protecting the family, that the alien business is a story he tells himself deliberately. I've read a lot of them, and I don't buy any of them personally. The episode where he does the maths and lands on aliens is fairly conclusive. He isn't pretending. He got there honestly through his own logic, and his own logic is broken in exactly one direction. So let's do that next. The cover story was migraines. That's how it worked. Nancy got headaches, and John Redcorn, licensed New Age healer, came round to treat them. 3 to 5 times a week. For 14 years, 3 to 5 times a week. Nobody in that house queried the treatment schedule. Everyone on the street knows. That's the part that always gets me. It isn't a secret in any functional sense. It's the most openly discussed fact in Arlen. Hank knows. Bill knows. Boomhauer knows. The only 2 people walking around unaware are Dale and Joseph. Peggy doesn't know either for ages, which is a lovely detail. The woman who considers herself the sharpest mind in town somehow misses the thing the entire neighborhood has been not mentioning for over a decade. Hank eventually has to sit her down and tell her, and she takes it about as well as you'd expect. Right, Nancy first. Because she gets flattened into just the affair, and she's more than that. Nancy Hicks Gribble, former beauty queen, which is how she got in the door at Channel 84 as a weather girl, and she works her way up to anchor. She's good at her job. She's also, when it suits her, every bit as ethically flexible as her husband, which the show demonstrates more than once. And then there's Joseph John Gribble. Look at that middle name for a second. John. Nancy named her son after his biological father and put it in the middle slot where nobody would look too hard. The official explanation for why Joseph looks the way he does is that Dale has a Jamaican grandmother. That's it. That's the whole cover. Nancy said it once, and Dale accepted it permanently. Now, here's where it becomes genuinely brilliant rather than just a long-running gag. There's a season 6 episode called Of Mice and Little Green Men where Dale does the maths. He actually works it out. He realizes he was out of town during the window when Joseph would have been conceived. He gets there. The paranoid conspiracy theorist correctly identifies that something does not add up about his own son. And his conclusion is aliens, not an affair. Aliens harvested his sperm and produced Joseph, and therefore Joseph is biologically his, just via an unconventional delivery method. He builds an entire conspiracy from scratch, using real evidence, specifically to arrive at the wrong answer and protect the thing he loves. I genuinely think that's one of the smartest pieces of character writing in any animated sitcom. It isn't stupidity. Dale's capable of noticing. He just has an infinitely flexible framework that will bend around any inconvenient fact until it points somewhere comfortable. It happens again too. Much later, a girl called Kate turns up, John Redcorn's daughter from a separate relationship around the same time. Dale discovers that Joseph and Kate share a father, and he concludes that aliens were involved in that one as well. Nancy, meanwhile, is mostly annoyed to learn she wasn't the only one. Here's a bit of Nancy's own history that I don't think gets talked about enough. Her mother, Bunny, did exactly the same thing to Nancy's father, a long-term affair, hidden for years. And Bunny only admits it when Nancy starts losing her hair from the stress of carrying her own version of the same secret. So this is a hereditary situation. And the resolution Bunny offers, the wisdom passed from mother to daughter, is wigs. Wear wigs. Don't tell him. That's the advice, and Nancy takes it. Now, John Redcorn himself, because his life outside all this is mad and nobody ever mentions it. He was a roadie for Winger. He was the front man of a band called Big Mountain Fudge Cake. He later reinvents himself as a children's musician, and he's actually successful at it, and the person who steers him into that career is Dale. Dale rebrands the man having an affair with his wife into a working children's entertainer out of pure friendship. Dale also wins him a lawsuit. 12 acres of land from the federal government, real legal victory, genuinely helpful. And John Redcorn then gets manipulated into building a casino on it, which was never going to work because his tribe had given up gaming rights in exchange for federal recognition, and casinos of that kind aren't permitted in Texas. The land ends up permitted for hazardous dumping to cover the debt. And that lawsuit is roughly when the affair ends, and the reason is guilt. Not being caught. Guilt. Dale was so decent to him that he couldn't keep doing it, so he pushed Nancy back toward her husband and stepped away. There's a line of his I think about a lot, which is that it's very difficult to watch an idiot raise your child. He says it with real weariness. He tried getting closer to Joseph a few times, awkwardly, against Nancy's wishes, and Joseph mostly found him creepy. So where are we now? The revival puts Nancy and John Redcorn back together, or at least strongly implies it. They co-host a house selling video series called Selling Arlen. The idea to pair them up was Dale's. Of course it was. The showrunner's been open about why they did that, incidentally. They took the relationship back to where it sat for most of the original run because that's what people remember about these characters, rather than where season 13 left it. And one last thing, which isn't a joke. John Redcorn was voiced by Victor Aaron originally, and then by Jonathan Joss from 1997 until his death in 2025. There's a tribute to Joss at the end of the new season. He was in that town for nearly 30 years. One more angle on this, because I think it's the actual reason the show never resolves it. Everyone in Arlen has made a decision not to tell Dale. Not one person, everyone. Hank knows, and Hank is constitutionally incapable of dishonesty about almost anything else. He'll tell a man his lawn is wrong. He'll tell his boss he's a liability. He will not tell Dale this. And the reasoning the show offers, when it bothers to offer any, is threefold. Dale is completely oblivious, so telling him would achieve nothing except damage. Dale genuinely loves Nancy and Joseph, and they genuinely love him. And the one that does the heavy lifting, Dale is more of a father to Joseph than John Redcorn has ever been. That last part is uncomfortable and true. Redcorn's attempts at closeness were awkward and sporadic and mostly landed as creepy. Dale is the one who was there. He resigned an executive job to be at home for the boy. He is present, constantly, weirdly, with a cigarette on. for every single year of that child's life. So the affair is the story and the secret is the story, but the thing underneath both is that the biological father lost by simply not showing up as much. Joseph, incidentally, has grown up to be more like Dale than either of his biological parents. Same paranoid streak, same odd humor, and he's picked up the cigarettes. In the revival, he and Dale are running near identical schemes in parallel. Joseph to help Bobby and Dale to help Hank, which is a lovely bit of writing. He's also, the revival hints, developed an interest in Native American imagery without connecting the dots. A love of horses, a dream catcher hanging in the flat he shares with Bobby. He's circling it without landing on it. And there's a suggestion that Bobby has worked it out by now and is saying nothing, which means the conspiracy of silence has now been inherited by the next generation. The one thing that nearly cracked it years ago was Nancy's hair. She started losing it from stress, and she got close, genuinely close, to telling Dale everything just to be rid of the weight of it. Then her mother arrived with her own confession and a practical recommendation, and Nancy chose the wig. She had the door open and she shut it. I'll be honest, that's the one bit of this whole storyline I can't quite make peace with. The affair itself, I understand. People do that. The alien business is funny, but the moment where she nearly tells him and then gets talked out of it by her mother over hair is the one that makes me wince, because it's the only point in 14 years where anybody in that family had a real choice and made the small one. I don't think the show judges her for it particularly. It's a comedy about a suburb, and it deals in the choices people actually make rather than the ones they should. But it does mean that of all the secrets in Arlen, this is the one that was closest to coming out and got talked back in by a relative, right? Let's cross the alley. The Bulldozer, that was his nickname. Not ironically, not in the way the lads use it now. He earned it at Arlen High playing fullback, and he set the school record for touchdowns doing it. That record was still standing years later. I think you have to hold on to that when you watch him, because the show gives you a man who eats out of bins and dances with a mop. And it wants you to know that 30 years ago, he was the most physically impressive person in the building. Full name. And it's worth doing properly because he does. Sergeant William Fontaine de la Tour Dauterive. Louisiana Creole, speaks fluent Cajun French, and gets his surname mangled by everyone who doesn't know him. Behind the scenes, he's named after Jim Dauterive, one of the show's own writers and executive producers, which must be a strange legacy to carry. Your surname is on a character famous for having a terrible life. Two nice bits of production trivia here. Stephen Root originally auditioned for Dale, decided it didn't feel right, and read for Bill instead. And Bill speaks the very first line of dialogue in the entire series. Before Hank, before anyone. The show opens with him. The job is Army Barber, rank of sergeant, and here's the thing people miss. He's brilliant at it. His day-to-day is shaving recruits, which is not exactly artistry, but when Hank's usual barber goes senile, Bill is the only person in Arlen who can reproduce that flat top. And when the Army decides to phase barbers out entirely, his base commander specifically keeps him on. He's possibly the last one left. He wanted to be a tanker. That was the plan. Armor, not hair. And then, in 1991, at a Molly Hatchet concert, a woman passed out in his lap. That's how he met Lenore. Not a meet cute, not a romance. She was unconscious and she landed on him, and he built a life around it. Lenore cheats on him, humiliates him, and eventually leaves. And by every account, it was the worst divorce Heimlich County had ever processed. Hank mentions that the arguments were loud enough for the whole street to hear. And Bill comes out of it as basically a hollowed-out version of the Bulldozer, and stays that way for the rest of the series. The one where the show properly stops joking is called Pretty, Pretty Dresses, and it's a Christmas episode, which is a choice. Bill hits the bottom of it on Christmas Eve. And the way Hank drags him out is by putting on a wig and pretending to be Lenore, so Bill can finally say the thing out loud. Bill confronts her, gets told "I don't love you anymore," and explodes with the line, "You don't deserve William Fontaine de la Tour Dauterive," which is the whole name again. in a moment of genuine dignity from a man shouting at his best mate in a dress. That's King of the Hill, really. It'll do the saddest scene it's got and keep the joke running through the middle of it, and somehow neither one cancels the other out. Now his father, and I'm going to just state this plainly because the show does. Bill was spanked every single day from the age of 9 to 16. He was called a girl. He was made to wear dresses. He was locked in a rabbit hutch. That's a list. That's how it's delivered as a list in a comedy, and then everyone moves on to the next scene. The show's position is that between his father and Lenore, Bill ended up with essentially no sense of his own worth and a tendency to be drawn to people who treat him badly. It says that outright. It doesn't dress it up. Right, the good news, because there is some. Bill dated Ann Richards, the actual former governor of Texas, voicing herself. And she is the one who finally gets him to accept that Lenore is not coming back and would be a disaster if she did. Lenore turns up to interfere, tries ordering him about in front of a former governor, and Bill's response is to moon her from the back of Richard's car. I have no notes. That's a perfect ending for that thread. He's also had, over the years, considerably more romantic success than his reputation suggests. Con's mother, Luanne's mother, 2 of his own widowed cousins, plus a minister at the Methodist Church. The man is not doing badly, all things considered. He just never manages to hold on to any of it. Which brings us to the family estate, because the Dauterive bloodline is one of the strangest running bits in the show. There's an episode where Bill goes back to Louisiana and finds his Aunt Esme running what's left of the clan, lamenting that the Dauterive blood is down to a trickle. Esme is voiced by Meryl Streep. The 3 cousins competing for Bill's attention, including one he's actually related to, are voiced by the Chicks. That's the casting on a Bayou inbreeding subplot. Meryl Streep and the Chicks. By the end of it, everyone else is dead, institutionalized, sterile, or an imposter, and it's down to Bill and his cousin Gilbert. 2 men, and that's the whole family line. And where's he now? Before the pandemic, the Army pushed him into early retirement. He kept cutting hair for a while by getting himself adopted into a barbershop across town. Then lockdown happened, and Bill stopped leaving the house entirely, gained a lot of weight, stopped shaving, stopped cutting his own hair, lived off delivery apps, and at one point Netflix ran a wellness check on him. He was still like that when Hank and Peggy got back. The pandemic ended and he didn't. A few smaller Bill facts, because the details on him are consistently strange. He has a hair thing. Not a mild interest, a proper fixation. When he cuts Hank's hair, the only payment he asks for is that he gets to keep the hair. Hank agrees. Neither of them discusses it further. He has had an extraordinary run of pets. A Rottweiler called Rex, an iguana called Lenore, which is the single bleakest naming decision in the series and also completely in character. He's 5'6 3/4, a figure he volunteers unprompted while introducing himself to a lawnmower focus group. Not 5'7", the 3/4 are important to him. He drives a marine blue 1987 Ford Escort with an Army sticker on the back. And he is, when he's not actively falling apart, considerably more worldly than anyone in that alley. He knows more about music and fashion and what's actually happening in the world than Hank does. He's articulate. There's a working brain in there, and it surfaces just often enough to make the rest of it sadder. There's a stretch where he and Luanne both end up working at a trendy salon called Hottie's, run by a stylist who brought the messy ponytail to Arlen. Bill gets the job by allowing everyone to assume he's a gay hairdresser, and he's brilliant at it, genuinely one of the most popular stylists there. Then the truth comes out and he's sacked for it, along with Luanne, who makes an impassioned speech about acceptance that changes nothing whatsoever. That's a fairly standard Bill arc, actually. He gets good at something, it works, and then something arrives and knocks it over, and he goes back to the alley. There's a phrase for it in the fan community, the Bill cycle, and the show does run it deliberately. He prospers briefly, and then it collapses, over and over. And here's the bit I want to be honest about, because it's the thing that stops him being purely funny. The show has taken Bill to some genuinely dark places. There have been stretches where he's clearly not safe on his own, where the depression isn't a bit, it's stated, it's not hinted at. And what it does with that is give him friends who are terrible at helping and show up anyway. Hank in a wig, Dale taking the mickey, Boomhauer, who is quietly the kindest of the three and does more listening than the others combined. None of them ever say the useful thing, all of them keep turning up. Which brings us back round to the alley, really. 4 men, a fence, and a syllable at the end. It's not therapy, it's what he's got, and it has kept him alive for about 30 years now, which is more than can be said for a lot of arrangements. I'll leave that where it is. Let's go and listen to somebody talk very fast. The voice is real. Not the character, obviously, but the voice, the actual cadence of it, came off an answering machine. Back in the Beavis and Butthead years, Mike Judge got a complaint message from a bloke he later described as a deranged hillbilly. It runs about 90 seconds. The caller says he's been ringing for over a month. He's furious, and the whole thing is delivered at a speed and slur that makes it almost impossible to follow. Judge assumed he was being shouted at about Beavis and Butthead. Reasonable assumption at the time, given the volume of angry post he was getting. He wasn't. Once people actually went through it properly, it turned out the caller was upset about Looney Tunes and its time slot. And the show he was mangling the name of came out sounding like Porky's Butthole. So a man rang up furious about cartoon scheduling, got misunderstood, and accidentally created one of the most recognizable voices in American television. And Judge used it directly. In the pilot, Boomhauer's rant at the social worker about the neighbor's dog lifts lines straight out of that voicemail. That's the caller's actual phrasing in the first episode. The tape itself was lost media for years, properly hunted for, and it turned up online in July 2022. It exists. You can hear the man Boomhauer is. Right, the character. Jeffrey Dexter Boomhauer III. Almost nobody in the show ever uses the first name. It doesn't get confirmed until season 13, episode 18, when a Canadian woman next door to a house he swapped into calls him Jeff. And then, in the finale, the big one, there's an episode called To Sirloin with Love, and near the end there's a close-up on his wallet lying open on the dresser. Driver's license, 6 foot, 185 pounds, and next to it, a Texas Ranger badge. He's a Texas Ranger. He has been the entire time. The job was the show's longest-running mystery. 13 years of non-committal hints, a man who always seemed to be at home, and then one silent shot in the last episode. No dialogue, no scene about it, just the wallet. I have complicated feelings about that reveal, and I'm not alone. A lot of people found it flat, precisely because it's handled as a visual footnote rather than a moment. Personally, I've come round to it. It's the only ending that fits a character whose defining trait is that you can't quite make out what he's saying. There's also a contradiction, and the show never fixes it. Early on, it's established that Boomhauer is an electrical engineer on workers' compensation. That's stated. That is not the same as being a Texas Ranger. You can square it if you want to. People have. There's a fairly popular fan theory that he's undercover, and the vagueness is the point, which I don't buy, but I do enjoy. My honest read is that the writers had 13 years and changed their minds, which is allowed. Small scheduling oddity attached to that finale since we're here. To Sirloin with Love was written as the ending, and it was the last episode Fox ever aired. But 4 more episodes existed and surfaced later in syndication. So the actual final broadcast of King of the Hill wasn't the finale, which is a very King of the Hill way for it to go out. Now, the fun stuff. He can speak perfectly clearly. He just doesn't. When he sings, every word is crisp. When he speaks French or Spanish, same thing, totally intelligible. The mumbling is only ever in English in conversation with his mates, and his friends understand him fine. That's the joke that never gets old for me. The audience is the only one struggling. There's a lovely running variation where they fail to understand him for some completely different reason, like him reading legal small print aloud, and it's the content that loses them rather than the delivery, the cars. He drives a 1969 Dodge Coronet Super Bee. In high school, he had a late 60s Mustang he called Ms. Sally. He's a classic car man, which somehow surprises nobody. The family are all like this, which is my favorite reveal of the lot. His grandmother, Meemaw, speaks in exactly the same fast, unintelligible gabble. His mother does too. It's not an affliction, it's a dialect, and it runs in the family. His parents won the lottery and moved to Florida, which is mentioned in passing and never expanded on. And his younger brother is Patch, voiced by Brad Pitt. Patch talks the same way and is a much sleazier version of the same man. He turns up engaged to Catherine, an old flame of Boomhauer's, and the engagement collapses after Patch brings strippers to his own bachelor party and then frames his brother for trying to wreck it. That Catherine thread is one of the few times Boomhauer visibly wants something and doesn't get it. Where's he now? Dating a woman with a son and treating the boy as his own, which for the show's designated womanizer is a fairly gentle place to end up. Couple more things about him, because he's the one the show gives the least screen time and the most texture. He plays the banjo. Skillfully, that's canon, and it goes almost entirely unremarked upon. He is also, and this genuinely surprised me the first time I noticed it, the adult Bobby talks to most. Not his parents, obviously, they're his parents. But out of the three men in that alley, the one Bobby actually goes to is Boomhauer. And the reason is simple arithmetic. Dale gives catastrophic advice. Bill gives advice that somehow leaves you worse off than before you asked. Boomhauer, once you decode him, is thoughtful and calm and tends to be right. He's the only one of the four who is consistently a good influence on a child, and he's the one nobody can understand. That's a proper piece of writing, that the show buried its wisest character behind a wall of noise and then let a 12-year-old be the one who bothers to listen through it. He's also relentlessly, cheerfully promiscuous, which the show is not remotely coy about. He keeps a video camera in his bedroom. He's got an endless rotation of women. And it's played as a fact about him rather than as aspirational or as a problem, which is a fairly light touch for a 90s sitcom. The one that got away, though, is Catherine. That's the thread I mentioned, the one where his brother turns up engaged to her. And what makes it interesting is that Boomhauer isn't angry about losing her exactly. He's angry on her behalf because he can see Patch is going to do to her what Patch does to everyone. He spends most of that episode trying to protect a woman he's not with from his own brother and gets framed for sabotage for his trouble. There's a running melancholy under Boomhauer in the later seasons that I only clocked on a rewatch. He's the one who notices he's got older. He's the one who thinks about how much the world has shifted. The others don't really do that. Hank resists change. Dale invents reasons for it. Bill is not in a position to reflect on anything. Boomhauer just quietly registers it, and the show hands him one of its better final images. The badge in the wallet, sat on the dresser, in a bedroom, at the end of an ordinary day. Whatever you think of the reveal, that's the right staging for it. He never explains himself in life. He wasn't going to start in the last 5 minutes. Right, over the fence. Connie's name isn't Connie. Her legal name is Keon Souphanousinphones Jr. Con wanted a son. He got a daughter. He named her after himself anyway, and then spent the rest of the series holding her to standards a son would apparently have been spared. Connie is the nickname that got built on top of it so she could function socially. That's the family in one document, honestly, and everything else about them fits inside it. Con first. Full name Kong Khoi Souphanousinphones. Born and raised in Laos, emigrated to Anaheim, and then moved to Arlen in the first season after problems with the neighbors he had before. Which is a detail I enjoy because it means the Hills are not the first people Con has failed to get along with. Before Arlen, he worked for a defense contractor making composite ceramic armor. That's real, specialized, serious engineering work, and he was fired from it for spilling company secrets. That's a pattern with him. The ability is genuine, the ambition is genuine, and the thing that keeps blowing it up is his own mouth. He goes through a string of jobs, drags his family across the country chasing them, and eventually ends up commuting to Houston because that's the only thing that stuck. He calls his neighbors rednecks and hillbillies constantly without fully understanding what either word means, and his one true north is Ted Wassenasong, a wealthier and more successful Laotian American he desperately wants to overtake. Ted, for his part, tolerates the Souphanousinphones and privately looks down on them, and once tried to get Hank into his country club purely because the club needed a white member to qualify as a tournament venue. Everyone in that social ladder is using everyone else. It's very well observed and very bleak, and it's played for laughs. Now here's the one that changes how you watch the whole series. Con has bipolar disorder. It's confirmed properly in a season 13 episode called Just Another Manic Con Day, with a brief mention earlier in Lost in MySpace. And the way the show frames it is direct. When he's taking his medication, he's sharp, capable, and genuinely likable. And when he isn't, he's the sullen, miserable, insulting man everyone in the alley has known for over a decade. That lands late, and it lands quietly, and it makes you rethink a lot of episodes. It doesn't excuse him. The show doesn't ask you to forgive anything. It just puts an explanation on the table after 12 seasons of behavior and lets you sit with it. I'll say the thing I actually think here. Akasim, since I've been fairly loose with opinions tonight, I'm not sure the show entirely earned that reveal. It's a big diagnosis to hand a character that close to the end. But it also isn't cheap because the writing had been consistent enough beforehand that it fits. The mood swings were always there. Somebody just named them. One more con fact that gets no follow-up whatsoever. He's a trained martial artist. There's a fight scene where he handles himself against several people with genuine technique, and it is never mentioned again by anybody. Right, Min, who I'd argue is the more dangerous half of that marriage. Her father is General Gum, a Laotian army general who served under several dictators and was eventually put on trial for war crimes at The Hague. She has a line about her own upbringing that I have never forgotten. Nancy assumes she grew up oppressed, and Min corrects her. She wasn't oppressed. Because of her father's rank, she says she was peasant's worst nightmare. She's telling you she was the bully, cheerfully, at a coffee morning. Min is also an outstanding shot, championship level. She joins Dale's gun club at one point and actually improves the place, which is the single funniest sentence available about Dale's gun club. She cheats at the New York Times crossword. She is relentlessly competitive about absolutely everything. And she's the better parent of the two, which the show is clear about. Ruder to the neighbors, kinder to her daughter. Connie, then, violinist, straight A student, prodigy by every metric. And the easy read is that she's an overachiever because her father is unbearable about it. The show goes out of its way to correct that. She works that hard for herself. The pressure is real. And she'd be doing it anyway, and those are two separate facts. She's one of Bobby's closest friends and his first girlfriend, and she's frequently embarrassed by her father in front of him, which is about the most relatable teenage experience going. Voice history, briefly. Toby Huss played Khan through the original run. Ronnie Chieng took over for the new episodes. Lauren Tom has played both Min and Connie the whole way through, which means she's been having arguments with herself since 1997. And now the part that surprised me most about the revival. Khan and Min are divorced. Not only that, they hid it for 2 years. 2 years of maintaining appearances in a neighborhood where everybody watches everybody. When it finally comes out, Khan is living in the garage and then packing his things. Leoma, his mother, has died. And in a fantastic bit of pettiness, Khan has revived his grudge against Bill for once dating her, and is now more hostile to Bill than to anyone else on the street. His mother's gone, and he's still cross about who took her out. Connie's at UT Dallas doing a double major. She was casually seeing Chain Wasana's song in an open arrangement, until her parents' divorce became public and Shane was about as supportive as a wet paper bag about it, so she dumped him, and then she and Bobby picked things back up, which is, after all these years, quite nice. The kid whose dad thought she was too good for Bobby Hill ended up back with Bobby Hill. 2 more things about that household that I keep coming back to. The first is Leoma, Khan's mother. She turns up in the 7th season finale, and she's lovely, kind, hardworking, genuinely enjoys housekeeping. Min cannot stand her, mostly because Leoma keeps gently critiquing her housework. So Leoma, bored and unwanted in her own son's house, goes and takes a job as the Hills' housekeeper. Khan is horrified. His mother is cleaning the redneck's house. And then it gets considerably worse for him because she starts seeing Bill. By the end of the episode, Khan has made his peace with it, and the 2 of them are still together. And then at the start of the next season, Bill is single again, and Leoma is simply never heard from again, which is the single most abrupt disappearance in the series. That's the relationship Khan is still angry about 20-odd years later after she's died. He has held that grudge across the entire gap in the show's production. The second thing is the doorbell problem, which is my favorite structural gag in Arlen. Khan's introduction to Hank is the 2 of them meeting over the fence and Hank asking essentially where he's from and getting Laos and having absolutely no frame of reference for Laos, and the exchange looping until Khan snaps. That scene is in the 1st season, and it set the terms for everything after it. 2 men who will spend 13 years living 6 feet apart, disliking each other, and slowly, extremely reluctantly becoming something that is not quite friendship, but is definitely not nothing. Because that's the thing about Khan. He calls them hillbillies constantly, and he never moves away. He's had job offers in other places. He commutes to Houston rather than relocate. He stays on Rainy Street next to the people he claims to despise for the entire run of the show. And underneath the boasting, what he actually wants, and the show says this outright, is their approval. He wants Ted Wasonasong to respect him, and he wants the men in the alley to like him, and he'd rather set himself on fire than admit to either. Which makes the divorce land harder than I expected, honestly. He hid it for 2 years because being seen to fail in front of that street was worse than being alone in his own garage. I did not expect a revival of King of the Hill to give me that. Anyway, let's talk about the Platters, because that side of the family is a proper mess. The trailer tipped over. That's the actual reason Luanne moves in with the Hills. Her mother and father had a drunken fight. Her mother stabbed her father in the back with a fork, and the fight was violent enough that it knocked their trailer over. And then this teenage girl walks into Hank Hill's kitchen and is, for the next 11 seasons, one of the sunniest people on television. I think that's the most underrated bit of characterization in the whole show. Luanne is treated as an airhead by essentially everyone, including the writing. And the premise underneath her is genuinely grim. Her full name is Luanne Leanne Platter. Her father is Hoyt, Peggy's fraternal twin brother. Her mother is Leanne. Leanne goes to prison for the fork, 2nd-degree assault. She turns up exactly once, in an episode called Leanne's Saga, after she's released. And while she's in Arlen, she gets briefly engaged to Bill Dauterive, which tells you a great deal about both of them. Later in the series, Luanne mentions her mother being in prison again, so that clearly didn't hold. Hoyt is the sadder one. Luanne believes her father works on an oil rig. That's why he's away. That's why he doesn't visit. It's a perfectly good explanation for a man being gone for years at a time. He's been in jail for most of her life. The oil rig was a cover story, maintained by the family so she wouldn't know. And when he does get out in an episode called Life, a Loser's Manual, he immediately robs somewhere and sets up Lucky to take the fall for it. He does confess in the end, which counts for something, and he gets life under a 3-strikes law. There's a small detail I love and hate in equal measure, which is that Lucky is the one who works out that his father-in-law has been inside. Not Luanne. Lucky, who nobody credits with anything, does the sums off how the man talks and gets there. Right, Buckley? Luanne's boyfriend Buckley dies in the 2nd season in an episode called Propane Boom, and the manner of it is almost too on the nose. He's working at the Mega Low Mart, and he drags a propane tank by the valve instead of the handles. The tank leaks. The store goes up. On a show about a propane salesman, the first major death is a bloke handling a propane tank wrong. And then in season 3, he comes back as an angel. Genuinely, Luanne is stressed out of her mind about beauty school finals. She starts seeing Buckley's angel bouncing on Khan's trampoline, and the entire town goes angel mad for a bit. That episode changes her life direction, incidentally. It's what sends her toward the church stuff, the born-again virgin program, the Bible study she runs out of the swimming pool while wearing a bikini, which is how we get the Manger Babies, public access puppet show, nativity themed. The premise is the barnyard animals who witnessed the birth of Jesus. And the barnyard animals include a penguin and an octopus. Nobody involved sees a problem with the penguin or the octopus. It runs for years. Luanne's not simple, by the way, and the show keeps quietly proving it. She's an expert mechanic in the early seasons, properly good with an engine. She's excellent at logic puzzles, and she has a genuinely vindictive streak when she feels slighted, which is my favorite thing about her because it completely undercuts the sweetness. She's tried to flush Hank's keys down the toilet, though she got Peggy's by mistake. She's put Peggy's shoes and glasses down the garbage disposal. She once dyed Peggy's hair green on purpose after being sacked as her pageant stylist. Then there's Lucky, Elroy Kleinschmidt, voiced by Tom Petty, which I still find slightly unbelievable every time I remember it. The nickname comes from the settlement, $53,000 from slipping on, in his own words, pee-pee at the Costco. Part of his spine had to be fused, and because he came out of it with a life-changing sum of money, everybody decided he was lucky. He blows most of it customizing a truck, gets down to about $9,000, and then a lawyer chasing an ambulance pays him off to avoid a suit, and he's back up to $53,000 again. Twice. The man has been paid the same amount twice for 2 entirely different disasters. He's got no credit and no social security number, so holding a job is basically impossible. And he's got a moral code that is completely rigid in ways nobody expects. He refuses to marry Luanne until he's earned a GED. He calls Hank and Peggy Uncle Hank and Aunt Peggy without being asked. Peggy hated him at first and tried hard to break them up, mostly out of terror that Luanne was recreating her parents' marriage. She sabotaged his studying. It's not her finest hour. When the pregnancy came out, she and Hank turned around and gave them the wedding. Their daughter is Gracie Margaret. Luanne, off her head on hospital painkillers, initially wanted to name her Lasagna on the grounds that lasagna was their favorite food. She reconsidered once the drugs wore off. And then there's the thing about all of this that isn't a story. Brittany Murphy died in 2009. Tom Petty died in 2017. Neither part was recast. So Luanne and Lucky aren't in the new episodes. There's a photograph, and that's it for a whole season. No explanation, no on-screen goodbye, nothing. Then, in the season 15 finale, they finally get mentioned. Bobby lived with Luanne and Lucky and Gracie while his parents were abroad. One line in a flashback confirming they were there and they took him in. That's all we get, and I think it's the right call. There isn't a graceful way to write around it. The show acknowledged them gently and left the rest alone. A bit more on Luanne, since she carried more of this show than her reputation suggests. The beauty school stretch is the one I always remember. She's at the academy with a teacher called Miss Kremser, voiced by Jennifer Coolidge, who is absolutely vile to her, and a fellow student called Sharona, who is hardworking, clever, and equally horrible about her. So Luanne is being condescended to from above and below simultaneously, and she keeps turning up. There's an episode where Hank has to go and make a speech to get her grade changed, which he does grudgingly, and Kremser briefly softens and is then straight back to being awful in the next appearance. The show does not do redemption arcs for people who are simply unpleasant, which I appreciate. Luanne drops out of college, works at the salon, gets sacked, runs a puppet show, works at Strickland for a bit. She's in and out of about 6 lives across 11 seasons. And the version of her that finally sticks is a wife and a mother at what? 22. And then the pregnancy and the shotgun wedding, which Lucky specifically requested. He wanted the shotgun. He thought it was traditional and correct. Hank's relationship with Lucky is one of the quiet successes of the later seasons, incidentally. He tolerated him, then rather liked him, largely on the grounds that Lucky wasn't like Luanne's other boyfriends, which is a very low bar that Lucky cleared with room to spare. Bobby bonded with him immediately because Bobby bonds with everybody. And Lucky plays guitar in Big Mountain Fudge Cake. He's in John Redcorn's band. Everyone in this town is about 2 degrees from everyone else. Now, one more thing about the Platter side, because there's a detail in Leanne's history that puts the whole family in a different light. Before Leanne, Hoyt was going to marry a pharmacist. That was the plan. A steady, sensible life with a woman who had a career. Leanne was the stripper at his bachelor party. So the entire Platter branch of this family, the trailer, the fork, the prison, all of it, comes out of a bachelor party going wrong. One night, and then 30 years of consequences, and a daughter who grew up believing her dad worked offshore. Peggy came out of that same family and went the other way. Same parents, same ranch, same Montana upbringing. She left, married a propane salesman, and built the most stable household on Rainy Street. The show never puts those two outcomes next to each other and asks you to draw a conclusion. It just has the twin brother in prison and the sister worrying about her boggle ranking and lets the contrast sit there. Right, let's do the edges of town. Let's start with the dog. Because the dog has a better backstory than half the humans. Lady Bird is a purebred Georgia bloodhound named after Lady Bird Johnson. And Hank claims in a season 1 episode called Westy Side Story that her mother was one of the dogs used to track down James Earl Ray. That's the family line she comes from. And she spends the series lying in a Texas back garden being told she's a good girl. She goes deaf later on. And she never has puppies, which Hank puts an enormous amount of effort into because it turns out she has a narrow uterus. I'll leave you to notice what the writers did there with the Hill household and its plumbing because they clearly noticed. She isn't in the new episodes and she isn't mentioned, which, for a dog who is already 13, is about as clear as it needs to be. Right, Buck Strickland. He's built openly on Lyndon Johnson, though the hairline is Johnson's. The habit of holding business meetings from the bathroom is Johnson's. There's even a photograph of Buck lifting one of his bloodhounds by the ears, which is a direct restaging of a famous and much criticized photo of the actual president doing exactly that. He's from Arkansas. He started with nothing and built a propane company, and by the time we meet him, the business sense has been thoroughly eroded by drinking, gambling, and affairs. He'll bet company profits. He'll bet on underground events. His heart has been surgically rebuilt more than once. He calls Hank Old Top. He also calls Hank his golden goose, privately, because he knows perfectly well that Hank is the only reason Strickland Propane still exists. And he was once willing to let Hank take the fall for a murder. Hank forgives him. Hank always forgives him. And the show is fairly blunt about why. Hank is desperate for a father figure, and the one he's got is Cotton, so Buck gets a level of loyalty he has done absolutely nothing to earn. Which brings us to the thing that finally broke it. We didn't know this for years, and the revival fills it in. Buck retired, and instead of handing the company to Hank, he handed it to his son, Ray Roy, and expected Hank to fall in line and work for him. So Hank quit, walked out, and never went back. And that's the real reason he was available for a propane job in Saudi Arabia in the first place. The premise of the new show is a resignation. Years later, Ray Roy has run the company into the ground, it's close to bankruptcy, and Buck is in a nursing home, bald, still sharp enough to make business decisions, and pathetic enough to beg Hank to come back and fire his own son for him. Hank says no, and then buys the company anyway, on his own terms. Peggy is impressed that he didn't fold, which tells you how rare it is. 13 seasons of that man swallowing it, and then he simply doesn't. Right, quick tour of the Otter residence, because this street has produced some genuinely strange people. Debbie Grunn, voiced by Reese Witherspoon, She's Buck's mistress, and when Buck ends things, she plots to murder him and his wife. She then accidentally shoots herself with Buck's own shotgun while climbing into a dumpster to hide. That is a real plot in the show, and it happens in a two-parter, and it is played reasonably straight. Chuck Mangione, the jazz musician, appears as himself. He's contractually obliged to promote Megalo Mart, and the contract turns out to be brutal because the chain opens 400 stores a year, and he has to show up to all of them. No touring, no recording, no family, so he disappears. Dale finds him living inside the Arlen store in a castle made of toilet paper, robbing the shelves at night. Mangione says he's doing it to stick it to the man, and Dale, being Dale, decides to keep his secret. When Senor Martinez, the gun-toting priest from the telenovela everyone in Arlen watches, actually got a live-action spin-off pilot, filmed in 2000, never aired, shelved, and then found by collectors in 2020. It's real, it exists. And 2 design notes I enjoy. Dooley, Bobby's laconic bully, speaks in essentially Butthead's cadence with a deeper voice and no laugh. Clark Peters, the blonde one with the ponytail and the permanent head-cold voice, is built to resemble Beavis. Judge put both of them in a middle school in Texas and hoped somebody would clock it. One more and then I'll stop. GH is 13 now. Cotton's second attempt, the one named Good Hank, grew up without a father because Cotton died and Dee Dee ended up a struggling single mother. And he's turned out withdrawn, and he's picked up a fair few of Cotton's worst attitudes, particularly about women, seemingly by absorption. The nearest thing he has to a father figure is Hank, which is a properly odd shape for that story to end in. The son Cotton, named to replace the disappointing one, is now being quietly raised by the disappointing one. A quick run through Strickland Propane itself, since a lot of people work there, and most of them are odd. Joe Jack is a fuel truck driver with a drinking and gambling problem, and his defining feature is that he calls everybody honey, regardless of gender, regardless of whether he's met them. Just honey to everyone forever. Enrique is the other driver, good-natured, terrible with money, permanently on the verge of throwing a party he cannot afford for an occasion that does not warrant one. He was voiced by Danny Trejo for most of the run, which I find funny every single time. There are 2 Donnas from accounting, and the show never acknowledges the swap. The first Donna gets sacked after Buck finds stolen office supplies in her bedroom, under circumstances I will leave to your imagination. And Buck's instruction to Hank is to go and find us a new Donna. So he does, and there is now a second, completely different Donna doing the same job, and nobody says a word about it for the remaining 9 seasons. Roger Sack, the comedian from Bobby's stand-up disaster, ends up working there too, after Hank gets him the job. He mellows considerably. There's a later episode where he tries to prove Hank isn't racist by administering a sensitivity test, which Hank fails so comprehensively that Roger concludes the opposite. And Ms. Liz, Buck's wife, voiced by Kathleen Turner. She takes control of the company at one point during a divorce, promotes Hank to manager, and then attempts to seduce him in a propane-powered hot tub, which he declines. She then tells Buck she succeeded anyway, purely to wind him up, and Buck responds by turning up at Hank's with a loaded shotgun. That is a plot in this show about a suburb, and I want to flag how casually it's handled because it says a lot about the series. A named character with a voice actor of that caliber gets a murder plot and an accidental death in a dumpster, and the show moves on inside 2 episodes and never mentions her again. King of the Hill will do something genuinely lurid and then refuse to treat it as a big deal, which I've always thought is a large part of why it's rewatchable. Nothing gets a fanfare. Ms. Liz eventually leaves for good, and Buck's summary of why is that she could handle the drinking and the gambling and even turn a blind eye to the affairs, but not all 3 at once and not on her birthday. 2 more residents and I'll stop. Principal Carl Moss went to school with Hank and played center on the football team. He's now a man who hides behind procedure and zero-tolerance policies, and Hank keeps reminding him of who he used to be. Moss once described the wood used in shop class as a fancy teaching aid, which is the funniest possible way to convey a school budget crisis. And Jimmy Wichard, the town idiot who Dale suspects gave himself brain damage staring into the sun, adding that he can't have been especially bright to attempt it in the first place. Which is, from Dale Gribble, a remarkable piece of judgment to be handing out. Anyway, let's talk about the show itself for a bit. 16 years off the air. That's the gap. The original run finished in 2009, The Last Stragglers turned up in syndication in 2010, and then Arlen sat there untouched while everybody rewatched it on a loop. Hulu greenlit the revival in January 2023, and then the writer's strike happened that same year. The writing staff downed tools until it was over, and the whole thing slid back by roughly a year. It landed on the 4th of August, 2025. 10 episodes all at once, no weekly drip. Saladin Patterson running it, with Mike Judge and Greg Daniels executive producing. And the premise they came up with to bridge the gap is honestly quite elegant. Hank and Peggy spent years in Saudi Arabia, where Hank had a propane job with Aramco. And crucially, they lived inside a company-built residential compound, a bubble, which is a very tidy structural excuse for two people missing about a decade of cultural change without either of them having to be an idiot about it. So they come home to an Arlen with rideshare apps, all-gender toilets, fancier beer, and the concept of being canceled, and they're baffled by all of it for roughly one episode and then get on with their lives. The show is careful not to turn Hank into a man permanently frightened of the modern world, which it easily could have. The first thing the revival actually does before any of that is confirm the narrow urethra is still narrow. Hank's stuck in a plane toilet on the way into Dallas, the queue outside is losing patience, and Peggy announces to the entire cabin that it isn't his fault he has a narrow urethra. Then she explains that a decade of hummus and falafel has made the situation worse, and compares him to Benjamin Button. That's the reintroduction. Nearly 30 years on, the first note they play is the one from the pilot, the numbers, and then I'll stop with numbers because I know that's not what you're here for. That premiere week pulled 1.21 billion minutes of viewing according to Nielsen, and it was the biggest adult animation premiere on Hulu and Disney Plus in 5 years. Hulu renewed it on the 30th of October, 2025 for 2 more seasons, 16 and 17, 20 episodes. Season 15 turned up on the 20th of July, 2026. Another 10, all at once, ending with the episode we already talked about, where Hank finally deals with Buck. Now, the recastings, and I want to gather them in one place rather than sprinkling them around because a lot changed. Toby Huss on Dale from partway through the first new season, Ronnie Cheng on Khan, Ty LeClaire on Joseph, Kenneth Choi on Ted Wasonasong, Ki Hong Lee on Cheney, Finn Wolfhard as GH, which I did not have on my card, and Keith David as Brian Robertson, a new character whose family rented the Hill House while they were abroad, and who now just hangs about in the alley because he likes the atmosphere. The originals still standing are Mike Judge on Hank and Boomhauer, Kathy Najimy on Peggy, Pamela Adlon on Bobby, Stephen Root on Bill and Buck, and Lauren Tom on Min and Connie. And here's the thing I keep coming back to about the revival. It's the same shape. That sounds like faint praise, and I don't mean it that way. Reviving a show usually means one of 2 disasters. Either you freeze it in amber and make 90 minutes of people saying their catchphrases at each other, or you modernize it so aggressively that it stops being the thing anybody liked. King of the Hill did neither. The men still stand in the alley and drink beer and say yup at each other. Bobby's an adult with a business. Bill got worse. Con got divorced. Dale was briefly mayor. Everyone aged in roughly the direction you'd have guessed, and nobody became a different person. Which, for a show whose entire subject is a suburb where nothing happens, is exactly right. The most on-brand possible outcome for King of the Hill was to come back after all that time having changed a normal amount. A bit more on how it got made, because the origin of the whole thing is odder than the finished product suggests. Mike Judge came off Beavis and Butthead, which was about as controversial as American television got in the mid-90s, and his follow-up was a gentle character comedy about a middle-aged propane salesman who loves his lawn. Those two things came out of the same person, 4 years apart. And he built the lead and the lead's wife out of two background characters from the first show, which means King of the Hill is essentially a spin-off about the neighbors who kept getting their property destroyed. Greg Daniels co-created it with him, and if that name rings a bell, it's because he went on to run the American version of The Office. So the man who gave you Michael Scott spent his previous job working out how Hank Hill talks. Arlen isn't real, but it's based on a Dallas suburb, and the specificity is the whole trick. The show gets propane right, it gets lawn care right, it gets the exact social grammar of four men standing near a fence right. There are a lot of shows about small-town America, and almost none of them can be bothered to know anything. The other thing worth saying is how long it actually ran. Over 250 episodes across the original 13 seasons. That's a genuinely enormous body of work for a show that never had a stunt, never had a musical episode, and never once sent the family to Paris. On the revival's approach, Toby Huss said something in an interview that I thought was well put. He said the return wasn't meant to be a nostalgia exercise, not a matter of looking back at the old fun people. It's another iteration of these lives a few years on. And apparently, Mike Judge was less than delighted at a suggestion that the whole thing amounted to bringing Andy Griffith back, which, having watched it, I'd say holds up. It isn't a victory lap. Bill is worse. Khan's marriage collapsed. Lady Bird is presumably gone. GH is a withdrawn teenager with nobody to raise him. They came back and let time have actually happened. A couple of production notes on the new run while we're here, because a few things about it are genuinely unusual. The whole season drops at once, 10 episodes, one day, no weekly wait, which changes what the show is for slightly. King of the Hill was built as a thing you caught on a Sunday evening, and it now exists as a thing you put on and leave running, which is, let's be honest, probably how most people were already watching it. The recasting was handled with more care than these things usually get. Johnny Hardwick had already recorded material before he died, so they used it, and then handed the part to somebody who'd been in the cast since 1997 rather than hiring an impressionist. Jonathan Joss recorded lines for the new episodes too, and got a tribute at the end of the season rather than a quiet write-out. And they didn't recast Luanne or Lucky at all. That was confirmed publicly at Comic-Con as a deliberate decision rather than a scheduling problem. You can disagree with that call. I've seen people argue that leaving two characters unexplained is worse than a respectful recast, and it's not an unreasonable position. My own view is that they got it right because there is no performance of Luanne that wouldn't have been distracting, and the show is better with a hole in it than with a substitute. The other thing I'd note is how little the animation has changed. Slightly cleaner lines, slightly better color, and that's about it. Nobody's redesigned Hank. Nobody's given the show a modern look. It still moves the way it moved in 1997 at that slightly stiff, unhurried pace, which for something that runs on people standing about talking is exactly the right choice. So it's the same show, made the same way, about people who are a decade older. So that's Arlen. There's a few things still hanging, and I don't mind them hanging. Nobody's ever going to reconcile the electrical engineer with the Texas Ranger badge. We still don't know what happened to Luanne and Lucky beyond one line in a flashback. And Dale is presumably going to go to his grave believing his son was assembled by aliens, which is arguably the kindest outcome available to everyone involved. I quite like that a show this ordinary has that many loose threads in it. Real neighborhoods are full of things nobody ever explains. There's more coming anyway. 2 more seasons are already ordered, so there'll be more of the alley, more of Bobby's restaurant, more of Hank running the shop he spent his whole life not running. The thing I keep landing on, having gone through all of them, is how much of this show is people declining to say the obvious sentence. Hank can't say I love you. Peggy can't say she's out of her depth. Bill can't say he's not coping. Nancy won't say the thing that would end her marriage. Nobody on that street will tell Dale what everyone on that street knows. And the four of them stand in an alley every evening and end the conversation with a noise. And somehow it isn't bleak. That's the trick I can't quite take apart. Every one of those people is carrying something they will never articulate, and they all keep showing up anyway for 30 years in the same spot holding the same beer. Maybe that's the point. Nobody in Arlen ever has the conversation. They just don't leave. I've got a few other bits I want to do on this show at some point. The propane episode specifically, and probably a proper one just on Cotton, because there's more in that man than fits in one go. But that's the lot for tonight. Thanks for sticking around this long. Sleep